Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our exploration, our discussions with respect to the recent Criterion Collection releases of this year, 2021. And that brings us to a very extraordinary work which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1079. And this is a work from 1984. It is a documentary work. The director is Martin Bell, although it is also described as being a film by Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark and Cheryl McCall. And it is this work. Streetwise. Before I go any further, I would like to make a comment about this particular Criterion Collection release. This is a single disc Blu-ray release from Criterion that includes two feature-length works. First is Streetwise, and the second is Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell. Each has its own spine number, the former being given spine number 1079, and the latter being given spine number 1080. They are distinct, and at the same time they are also very much directly connected with each other, as well as having connections with other short films that are included as part of the supplements in this particular release, specifically the supplements that can be found in the section of the disc that is associated with the latter film, Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell. So, in other words, we have separate films, but they also form an incredible, extraordinary body of work from these filmmakers, Cheryl McCall, and then Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark. And in particular, Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark, who we will see also in terms of how they, too, are reflected their own personalities and their own lives, how they are personally affected and reflected in the works that we have contained within the entirety, within the whole of this Criterion release. Again, Streetwise and Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell. However, they are distinct, separate works, and so I propose that we divide the conversation into two, one dealing with the former and the other dealing with the latter. So in that spirit, let us now turn our attention, if we may, or if I may, to the discussion devoted to the first of these works. Again, spine number 1079. It is Streetwise. This is a film that is described as being directed by Martin Bell, but is also being it is also described as being a film by Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark and Cheryl McCall. It is an extraordinary, haunting, shocking, and very memorable documentary work that covers this particular place in this particular time, the place being Seattle, Washington, which at the time, according to Martin Bell, in the extraordinary Criterion supplement commentary track, it's described as being a very affluent place at the time, such time being the early 1980s. And specifically, the film Streetwise documents or covers or introduces us, the viewers, to a group of individuals, specifically youths, children, teenagers, who find themselves in this particular place or part of the world in these circumstances. They are maybe, they have run away from home, maybe they are homeless, or they have come from, or they live in certain family situations that are described or depicted as having certain circumstances or situations that are stressful or that cause some kind of rift between parents and children, some kind of distance that has arisen or that has occurred due to specific circumstances of the family dynamic that have, for one reason or another, given rise to the reasons for these children, these kids, these youths to be where they are in this particular point in time, and their lives and the state of their lives and their existences as we find them at the point of this film, Streetwise. In that way, it is very haunting, very shocking, because we see firsthand the cruelty and the harshness of the world in which these kids are living. For instance, we understand or we learn that many of them are, as I say, homeless, or they are having to try to make ends meet on their own. And oftentimes that means that they are unable to attend school. Again, these are young teenage children, and they are unable to attend school, but they have to make do with their circumstances and try to, as they say, try to save up money to get something to eat, to get nourishment. But that is not always easy in this circumstance because of, as I say, the experiences that they are enduring and being confronted with. And this also means that a number of them are exposed to the cruelties and harsh realities of, for example, living on the streets, and also the drug use, and also prostitution, and also violence and crime, and also the realities, the cold, hard realities of the support systems or lack of support systems that are bringing about these overall circumstances that are, in a sense, compelling these children, these kids, to be where they are at this particular point of the film, Streetwise. So in those ways, it is an incredibly haunting and disturbing work that is also giving us a means by which we can also get to know and to meet these individuals, these human beings, and to get to hear from them their perspectives on their circumstances. We get to hear a little bit as to perhaps why they are where they are. We get to hear from them about what specific challenges they face in a given moment, and to be privy to that, or to be allowed into this particular world. It is it's quite shocking indeed, and to see what it is a number of these children are having to face in this particular film that we see. And in this way, we do meet so many of these individuals, and we get to know them by name. Some of them appear perhaps briefly, others appear more prominently than others, and yet others then appear quite prominently to the point where they become central focus points of this particular work, Streetwise. And so, for instance, we meet people like Patty and Munchkin and Shelley and Shadow and Roberta and Patrice and Lulu and Dwayne and Rat and Aaron or Tiny and others. And so this becomes, as I say, a portrait or a glimpse into the lives of these individuals, these human beings. We get to hear a little bit from them directly through audio interview excerpts that are applied in a very carefully thought out way throughout the work. We also see that juxtaposed to the images, of course, and we see their lives on the street, and we see them, for instance, interacting with each other. A lot of them are friends with each other, so there is a sense of a type of youthful type of energy that is being expressed and displayed on the screen, and we see these kids smiling and laughing with each other, which reminds us that they are indeed children, that they are kids, and yet also we are reminded and confronted with the harsh truths of their lives that lead them to these very adult situations, these situations that are quite difficult indeed. And to see these kids having to deal with these situations in their own ways, it shows us many things. It shows us a lot of the difficulties of their lives. It also shows us about who they are as individuals, and through that we get to know them all the more as the work Streetwise progresses from one situation to another situation to another situation. One of the other aspects too is we get to know a little bit about their family backgrounds, or what those backgrounds were and what could have been the circumstances that led to these youths being where they are at the time. And so there are a number of instances where we meet, say, the parents or the mother or the father of these particular children. For instance, there are some moments where we see Patrice, and we see him with his mother, or we see the person, the young boy Dwayne, and we see his interactions with his father. Or we get to hear from Rat in an interview or audio interview as to what the circumstances from his perspective were that led to a type of rift or distance between him and his parents. Or we see, for instance, a young woman, Kim, and she's talking about how she feels about her mother and the type of distance that she feels with that. Also, we get to hear a little bit about, or quite a significant amount, in fact, about Erin or Tiny and her relationship with her mother. And we actually also get to see a little bit of that directly, because there are some moments where the film shows us interactions between her and her mother, and we understand and realize that it is these are very specific circumstances that these young people are facing, and a lot has to do with these circumstances of their parents and what it is and the struggles that they are going through. And perhaps those struggles also have these effects on the younger generation, and it is this dynamic too that is on display in this film Streetwise in this very bold and extraordinary manner. And so there is so much power and sadness, and also there is a sense of the capturing of these human beings and who they are, and listening to their voices and seeing them interact with each other, and the type of playful innocence on the one hand, and also the harsh realities of the other. And it is this careful layering of the cinematic expression of their stories in this documentary form that makes this work Streetwise a very unforgettable and powerful work indeed. And so in that way, this Criterion Collection release, I think, is a very powerful one. It has the work Streetwise, but also in association or in relation to the Streetwise film component of this overall Criterion release, we have a number of supplements. Now, to be specific, when you put the disc into the player, it'll bring you to the main menu, and then from that main menu you can choose either Streetwise or Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell. And once again, we will speak about Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell in a separate video. But if you select Streetwise, then it brings you to the Streetwise related menu, which brings you to a selection about the movie and the chapters, and also the commentary track and the supplements. And so let's speak about those right now. So first, let us focus on the commentary track. This is a commentary track that was recently recorded for the Criterion Collection, and this is by Martin Bell. It is extraordinary. It is so extraordinary, and so if you have a chance, please listen to this commentary track as you're watching the film, because Martin Bell goes into so many details that I think are essential and that really help guide us through a watch of this film or a rewatch of this film, because it can be a very difficult and challenging work because the subject matter is so, it is very, because it's dealing with a lot of harsh realities of these particular youths. It can be very difficult, but Martin Bell does provide, I think, some really calm guidance as to some of the reasoning behind the film techniques, and also some of the circumstances involving the individuals both in front of and behind the camera. Speaking of which, there is this really lovely way that Martin Bell reminds us of who these people are as individuals. He lets us know of their names as they appear on the screen. So he remembers these people, and he gives them, or he allows them their voice as they appear on camera, and then he gives us also some circumstances or information about what may have happened to them after the film ended. And there are some that passed away very early under some very tragic circumstances, and so if that's the case for some of these individuals, then Martin Bell does share some of that information as well. And he also talks about Cheryl McCall and working with Cheryl McCall, and also the idea about how one of the underlying inspirations was in fact the Life magazine article from 1983, Streets of the Lost, and it was written by Cheryl McCall with photographs provided by Mary Ellen Mark, and so that is referred to in the commentary by Martin Bell. And that's great too, because as part of the booklet we actually have a reproduction of that article, Streets of the Lost. So if you get a chance to, please check out the booklet and the Life magazine article from 1983. And he also, Martin Bell, lets us know about how wonderfully, how motivated Cheryl McCall was in trying to get at a certain result, and that was that formed part of the basis for which this film ended up getting made. Also, another partner that Martin Bell mentions in the commentary track is Mary Ellen Mark, who is the photographer and also was the partner of Martin Bell. And so their working relationship forms another foundation for this work, Streetwise. And so it's really lovely to hear Martin Bell's remarks about Mary Ellen Mark and their working relationship together, and what it is she brought to this particular work, Streetwise. And Martin Bell informs us about how it was Mary Ellen Mark in particular who had this very close relationship with these people who appeared in the film. And so it was that relationship too, that friendship, that really lasted in some circumstances or some situations, that lasted for many years after the fact, after this film was over. And we will see perhaps echoes of that, those circumstances, when we explore some of the other works that are included in this Criterion release. There are some other details that Martin Bell reveals in this commentary track, and one of the details which I thought was really interesting was that there was this way in which he was trying to, on the one hand, give a certain amount of room and respect for these people as he was filming them, or as the filmmakers were filming them. And so that meant, for example, getting their permission and getting the permission of the people involved, for instance, some of the counselors or doctors as well that are seen talking with or consulting with these particular children, for example. There's a scene where we have a consultation involving Tiny and maybe medical examination results, or there is a similar type of scene involving Dwayne, the young boy, and a medical examination and his health at a given point in time, his physical health. And so on the one hand, there is a sense of distance that is being captured here. But on the other hand, too, Martin Bell does reveal in the commentary about how he would always want to keep a record of this, especially when there were scenes that perhaps were depicting some of these people or some of these individuals, and then they would probably walk away. It wasn't quite clear exactly where they were going because the camera wasn't following them, but the implication is that maybe they are on their way to meeting someone for, say, what was known as a trick, because as we know, some of these youths were also engaged in prostitution. And so Martin Bell does mention how he would try to keep distance on the one hand, but also, for instance, capture the license plate number of the car, for example. And so this, I think, is indicative of the very sort of sensitive situation or position that Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark and Cheryl McCall were in. They were there to try to depict their lives, and also they got to know these people, but also it was capturing what it was they were going through in this documentary form. And so in that way, it's a very challenging and quite a profoundly challenging cinematic document. And so I think Martin Bell's comments here in the commentary track, in terms of his maybe his recognition of how challenging that position is, I think are comments that I appreciated very much. And also he mentions in the commentary track about how there was this idea of trying to capture the documentary journalistic aspect, but also capture something of what he calls the filmic, which is something that is not necessarily, it's using cinematic techniques in a way that aren't wholly documentary, but in fact they could be almost akin to, say, narrative film techniques. Now, I'm not saying that this is a narrative film, but what I'm saying is the techniques involved do seem to suggest this. For example, the use of tripods, the use of fixed camera positions, rather than, say, the handheld camera technique, the use of, therefore, these carefully established frames through which and in which the subjects, the individuals, pass through or become the central focus of our attention as we watch the work. And also the application of audio interviews rather than on-screen camera interviews. And this is something that Martin Bell, I think, decided upon early on, which was not to use the on-camera interviews, but in fact use the images and juxtapose the images with, say, the words that were spoken by the individual. For instance, there's a very memorable sequence at the very start of the film involving the individual rat, the young boy, and we see him look in the camera. And as we see this extraordinary close-up of his face, we also hear his words that are from a different, or recorded on a different occasion, where they're speaking about how he has a sense of freedom, and in relation to jumping from a height into the river below. And this is a type of expression of the sense of freedom that he so desperately seeks in his life. And so it's a really poignant shot in terms of the visuals, and then to get the words, spoken words on the soundtrack is also quite extraordinary. So this is, I think, an example of what Martin Bell refers to as the filmic. And we also get a sense of this in some of the other supplements, which I'll get to in a moment, in particular the interview with editor Nancy Baker. But going back to the commentary track, for these and other reasons, this commentary track is really great. He does also talk, for instance, about some of the other details, some of the other individuals that we meet, Baby Gramps, and one of the most memorable musical renditions that's captured early on in the film. He also talks about the circumstances by which this film was ended up being made, some of the support, for instance, Willie Nelson, etc. Also connections, if we're talking about music, there are certain connections made with Tom Waits as well, and other of these details that I think make for, he also speaks in a lovely way about how the youths had this almost ferocious energy about them, and how there is this lovely intelligence to their speech and to the rhythms of their speech, as well as, of course, to the content and details of their lives that they were expressing themselves. For example, Erin, Tiny, who becomes a very central figure of this documentary, expresses herself so clearly, and in many ways it's a very eloquent way of expressing herself, and she has this intelligence about her circumstances and her life and her physicality and her body, as well as her hopes and ambitions. And we are reminded also that at the time of filming she was 14 years old, and we are also told that she first came to this street life when she was 13, and to be reminded of this is also another layer of quite a shocking confrontational type of feel when we watch this film, because we realize just how young these individuals are, and the types of situations, very real world adult situations that they are facing at such a young age, and they are expressing it with a type of intelligence, and also a raw honesty that is really quite overwhelming on an emotional level. And Martin Bell does mention this, in the fact that, for instance, Tiny is so honest about herself and her surroundings and others. And so it's, for this and other reasons, I think this is a very extraordinary and very challenging commentary track about a very extraordinary and challenging work, which is Streetwise. So that's the first of the supplements, perhaps. But then if we go to the supplements menu directly, we see that there are two supplements plus a trailer. The first of these supplements is a one-on-one interview with Martin Bell himself, and this is described as being another recent one from 2020, approximately 10 minutes. Here we have Martin Bell speaking directly about his work on Streetwise, but also very poignantly about his relationship with Mary Ellen Mark, who by this time had passed away herself. And so in many ways, his remarks here are also a type of celebrating the legacy, if you will, of Mary Ellen Mark, and what it was that she brought to her art and her photography, and how her energy and inspiration became one of the fundamental points of the Streets of the Lost and also Streetwise. And it was her power and her energy that brought these youths very close to the point where certain friendships were made and they lasted over time. And as I say, this becomes very significant when we speak about or consider the other film in this Criterion release, which is Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell. And so he speaks so beautifully about the art and the humanity of Mary Ellen Mark, as well as adding to the discussion of the circumstances under which Streetwise was eventually created and made. And so he does speak also about Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell, and about that relationship. And so perhaps it might be worthwhile to catch up with this interview with Martin Bell after one has seen both Streetwise and Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell. In any event, Martin Bell's comments here are so lovely, and you can tell that there is this respect and love that he had for Mary Ellen Mark. And he's describing too about how much she respected the people that they met and that we meet through Streetwise and indeed through Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell, and about the harshness of their realities and how it was, how some of them didn't survive, unfortunately, in very tragic circumstances, but some of them did. In fact, it was, and how they survived. Those stories are sort of extraordinary, frightening, and miraculous stories in and of themselves. And so this interview with Martin Bell is well worth it. And again, perhaps after watching both Streetwise and Tiny, The Life of Aaron Blackwell, one can visit this great, great interview with Martin Bell. Again, approximately 10 minutes. And then we have another interview, this time with editor Nancy Baker. And this is described also as being a recent one from 2021, in fact. Approximately 17 minutes. This is a really great interview because she is speaking about her work on Streetwise and working with Martin Bell and Mary Ellen Mark, and the idea of the challenges of trying to find what she refers to as a type of narrative through line or narrative thread. There was a lot of footage shot, according to her, and in fact according to Martin Bell on the commentary track, approximately 50 or 60 hours of footage. And from there, to try to distill it or try to condense it or to find the essence of the story in what ended up becoming about a 90-minute film. That is an extraordinary feat in terms of editing and trying to find the narrative thread. But that could also be a challenge, and I think Nancy Baker relays this or conveys this very eloquently in this great interview. And in part of that discussion, she reminds us about the filmmaking technique. Martin Bell uses a tripod in a lot of places, and instead of the handheld shaky camera, instead he oftentimes relies on a fixed point of filming, and then from there the individuals traverse the screen or become part of the central points of those fixed shots, which is a kind of another way to say that it is a filmic way, or these are filmic techniques in this documentary film. And talking too about the harsh juxtaposition between adolescence and adulthood that we see portrayed and shown in the lives of each of these individuals that we're meeting. The idea of trying to find the opening of the film, how to open this, what is the hot sauce, which is Nancy Baker's very interesting turn of phrase, and how she was very moved, for instance, by Rat's story, and the idea of the scene in the laundromat, for instance, or the opening of the film involving Rat. Also, she reminds us about, at the time, Seattle was a very affluent part of the world. She also references Baby Gramps, also Dwayne and the scenes between him and his father, how they were filmed, and there's a particular conversation between Dwayne and his father, which is so remarkable in terms of how it was filmed and what was actually captured in that conversation. And of course, that leads to how the film ends, and what the choices were and how to try to find a type of way to close the film, because there are some very dramatic moments and quite there are some very sad moments as well that are captured, and it was also up to the filmmakers to try to figure out how to show this in this particular work, and what it was the choices were as part of that, say, trying to best respect the these people, these human beings, again, in this cinematic expression, which is Streetwise. So another great interview with Nancy Baker, and so please check it out if you can. And then we have the trailer, which is another fascinating one, and we see also the great way in which the music is used to try to give us a glimpse of what this film is about, Tom Waits. And so please check out the trailer if you can as well. So this is the discussion of Streetwise that is found in this Criterion Collection set. There's also the booklet, and so I will perhaps speak a little bit more about the booklet in the second discussion, which is going to be about Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell. But let me just mention that there is an essay by Andrew Hedden called Qualities of Life. And this is an essay that focuses on Streetwise and Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell. And so it is relevant to the conversation of Streetwise, but it probably might be best read after one has seen both works. But it is still, in that context, a great, great essay by Andrew Hedden, so please check it out if you can. There's also a writing by Mary Ellen Mark called Reflections on Tiny 2015, and so this is probably something to do quite directly with Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell. But as we know, Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell does have direct connections with Streetwise, and we will talk more about those in the second discussion. But also in the booklet there is the reprinting of the Life magazine article Streets of the Lost from 1983, Cheryl McCall and Mary Ellen Mark. And so this is very, I think that article is key in getting a sense of, or yet a deeper sense of the world. And also the article, which was one of the points of inspiration that it ended up becoming Streetwise itself. So, and also it shows us the photographs of Mary Ellen Mark and also the text of Cheryl McCall. So please check that out if you can. That's one of the great strengths of this particular Criterion release, is the inclusion of that article. So well done, Criterion, for being able to do that. And so with that, my friends, that concludes this discussion on the film Streetwise. But we will continue the discussion in a separate video about Tiny, the Life of Aaron Blackwell. So I hope to see you at the next video, my dear, dear friends. Okay, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.